Good afternoon and welcome to the eFocus series webinar for spring cleaning your Razor's Edge database. I'm Allison Watts and we'll be talking today about 3 different kinds of spring cleaning tasks that you may want to do at this time of year or at least on an annual basis. We're taking advantage of the change in seasons to do those annual tasks that you may not have the time or inclination to do on a daily basis or the need to do on a daily basis. But at least once a year, it's a good idea to sweep out the cobwebs, clean out the gutters, make sure that your home or your database is operating at optimal performance. There also are some special projects that you might think about doing this time of year that you wouldn't have the time to do other times of the year, or when you're doing your day-to-day operations. These are more special projects of spring cleaning that you need to plan ahead for, like painting the dining room, where you may be using the dining room every day of the year, and so you need to plan a time when you can use the kitchen instead, or whatever the case may be. So there are some projects that you need to plan ahead for and allocate resources for that are next level kind of spring cleaning. And then finally, there may be some very large projects like replacing the roof or the heating and air conditioning system that you plan far in advance for, and they may not be critical to your day-to-day operations, but they are definitely needed for your long-term success and productivity. So let's get started with the first type, that annual clean out the cobwebs kind of operations or tasks. So first of all, you want to notice if your database is at the most recent, using the most recent version. This is simple to do. Just go to the Help menu in the toolbar from any screen of the Razor's Edge and then choose About, and you will see the version that you're using displayed there. The most recent version is 7.95, and this sample database that we're using today is 7.93, so anything that we talk about today will be operational functional for a database at 7.93 version or higher. If you're not at 7.95, then you might go to blackbaud.com to make sure or to see the updates that are available and to download and implement them. You might also choose to wait. Some organizations do. But you could read the README files at the website to decide as an organization if you want to go ahead with the most recent upgrade. But I do recommend, at the very least, exploring this because there are lots of good tools that are implemented each upgrade, and Blackbaud makes an effort to make these upgrades available on an annual basis. So that's why it's part of our annual spring cleaning. Next, you may want to check the security settings for your user, because not all of the tasks that are performed for database maintenance are available to every user. Most are only available at the supervisor level or in a group that has that level of access, security access. And you'll know this because on the navigator bar on the left-hand side of your screen, you won't see some of the areas, the function areas that we're going to talk about today, admin, config, for example. This may be fine. It may not be in your job description to perform database maintenance tasks, and that is appropriate for most organizations that there is only one person who has that sort of oversight. Decisions are made about database maintenance as a group, but when it comes to actually performing them, that's usually one person. So to know if you're able to do that, go to Admin Security and then open your user by clicking on your username. And then you will see that you are either a supervisor or you're in a group. And this person is, this Bonnie is a supervisor, and there is no name in the group member of window. So she has the rights to do any database maintenance tasks. One threat or challenge, to use a less threatening word, is to one challenge to database integrity is duplicate records. And this is a very common issue or occurrence for a lot of organizations. Maybe you had acquired a list, a mailing list, and imported records into your database without first checking that the records were already there. Or maybe you have an online tool that allows donors to manipulate their records, and so a second duplicate record got added for them. Whatever the reason may be, it's a great idea to manage duplicates on a regular basis, and the more often that you do it, the less time consuming that it is. So there's a tool under admin called Duplicate Constituent Management Tool, and once you click on that option, you will see the pop-up box to start a new search or open a previous search. If it's the first time that you've done this, it may take a while to perform the search, and so you might want to do it over your lunch hour or at the end of the day or at a time when you're not busy and don't need to access the Razor's Edge for a little while. But once you have conducted that search, and it performs on an algorithm that looks at first name, last name, address lines, and etc., that you don't have to worry about setting. That algorithm is built in behind the scenes. But once you press new search, then you will see, and it runs and it completes, you will see the screen where all of the possible duplicates are listed down the left-hand side of the screen of the window. And this particular sample database is quite pristine because there's only one possible duplicate, which is really not a real-world situation. But you do see you see the two possible duplicate records side by side, Jill H. Garrett and Jill Garrett. And one of them is selected as a master record. This means that it's older or it has more gifts or something, and we'll see in a minute how that happens, how that is determined. But if I say that these two are in fact duplicates, I've looked at the details down the rows, and I know that yes, they're duplicates, then I just click on Merge into Master Record. Then all of the Jill Garrett details go into the Jill H. Garrett record, and if there's any overlap for any particular field, the Jill Garrett, the servant record, if you will, loses those details, and the master record retains them. So if there are two addresses or there are two middle names, the servant record is the name that is lost, and then the master record is the name that is retained. Otherwise, if there isn't overlap in any fields, then it all gets sort of bodged together in the one master. You can change which record that you want to set as master just by right-clicking on the screen, or if you want to change which is permanently, or as a rule for all records, set as master, then you can go to Tools, Settings within the Duplicate Management tool. And then you can change whether the master is determined based on age, or based on number of gifts, or based on activity, or whatever the case may be, whatever is most appropriate for your organization. So then you go through those records one by one, or actually two by two by two, and merge them together if they're indeed duplicates. Just click not a duplicate if they aren't, and they're truly two different people, and then they won't show up in the duplicate management tool ever again. So, and like I said, the more often you run this, then the fewer duplicates that you'll have to merge on a regular basis. Another great tool that is provided you with your install of Razor's Edge is the Table Cleanup utility. Tables are the way that relational databases function. They really provide the backbone of your database. So if the tables are cluttered or confusing or large, then the structure, the backbone of your database will start to fail or not perform optimally. So this is an area to examine on at least an annual basis. Go to Config, then Tables, and select the table that you want to review. And it's not a bad idea at all to go through all tables and at least sort them. So you would just start at the beginning of the list and click on Sort for each table as you go through. Sorting allows hotkeys to be enabled when you're doing data entry. So instead of having to scroll through a list, you can just type the first letter of the value in the list and it will populate on your screen or in that field. Also, you can help prevent mistakes in data entry by putting the most common values needed for a table at the top. So for example, in my listing here, I've got the suffixes table showing, and you might put junior, senior at the top of the suffixes table because those are the most commonly used. Now also, my example has some duplicates for junior in particular. There's junior with a comma, junior without a comma, and junior with the J and the R capitalized. Now I don't need all three of those. In fact, it can cause some data problems when exporting mailing lists or doing reports if there are duplicates like this in a table. So I want to get rid of them, and it's easy to do using the table cleanup utility. So I just click on that from the toolbar. And then I see this pop-up box where I can select which bad, so to speak, values I want to take out. In this case, the capitalized junior and the junior without the comma. And then I replace both of those with comma space JR period. Once I click on Replace Now, the system goes, or this tool goes through the entire system, replaces every instance of JR capital and JR without the comma with JR period with the comma, and then deletes the bad values from the table. So it's a very nice utility. It takes a lot of steps out of your having to do that manually, but it is one of those no undo button kinds of tasks. So if once you click Replace Now, the task will be executed and there's no going back. So this is an area or a time when it's really great to have performed a backup before you even begin, really before you begin any of these spring cleaning kinds of tasks. You should, I know that you have backups running nightly that back up all your systems, not just Razor's Edge, but you can also do a backup just of Razor's Edge using the Blackbaud Management Console, and your IT staff can help you with that, or we here at Capital Business Solutions could help you with that if you have concerns that it's not running. You also should test the backups that you do have before you proceed with any sweeping changes, because it may be that it looks like the backups are running, but when it comes to actually using the file to restore your database, it's not. And the worst time to find that out is after a fail or after a global change that you wish you are trying to undo or restore. So just a word of caution to be performing these cleanup tasks, these spring cleaning tasks mindfully, and having a backup beforehand. A way that organizations can add to the tables in the Razor's Edge and sort of create fields that don't exist already is by using attributes. So attributes are qualities, values that you've made up, your organization has added to the basic install version of Razor's Edge. And it stands to reason that your organization would have changed the way they use attributes over time. So some of these become obsolete and need to be made inactive. To do that, you just simply go to Config, Attributes, and then select the kind of attributes you want to address. In this case, in my example, constituent attributes. And then you'll see all the different kinds of attributes listed in the main part, the right part of the screen. And you can just click on the active, inactive checkbox to the far right. So you can see that there are a couple of historical gift attributes in this database, and the very word historical makes it seem that these aren't going to be used on an ongoing basis. This is maybe legacy data information that was brought over in a conversion, and no new records are going to need an attribute of historical information. And that's just what happens with this deactivation. The records that have the attribute will still have the attribute, and nothing happens to it. It doesn't go away, but you don't see it in a drop-down menu for adding to new records. You can still query on it, you can still report on it, but you can't add it to a new record. So it helps with efficiency in data entry, and it helps with accuracy because there's no confusion about old attributes that shouldn't be used any longer. By the same token, you probably want to deactivate campaign fund and appeal records from time to time, especially appeal records, which are most often dated or time sensitive or time specific. Funds are less so. Funds usually relate to the areas of giving that donors can contribute to, and campaigns are sometimes dated, sometimes not, but appeals almost always are. So over time, you're going to have ones that are no longer used, and on an annual basis is a good time to review that. So just go to Records and then choose Appeals and open Appeals. And instead of typing any search criteria in, just leave it blank. So leave where it says Appeal ID and Description blank, and click Find Now, which will show you all the possible appeals in your system. Notice that in the bottom left-hand corner, this display inactive is unchecked because I only want to see the active ones that I might need to make inactive. So once I have selected all, I might see, for example, there's some from the year 2000. Now, I know those are outdated. I don't need those anymore. So I will just open one of them and simply click that the appeal is inactive. And like the attributes, an inactive appeal doesn't go away. All the records that had the appeal still do. You could still query or report on that appeal, but you can't add the appeal to any new gifts as they come in. And again, it helps with data entry. It helps with efficiency and accuracy. Also, on an annual basis, is a good time to review if you have had staff changes throughout the year. Maybe someone went to a different department or they left the organization and they don't need a user login any longer in Razor's Edge. So it's simple to go to Admin and then Security and open the various users and look at their status. I do not recommend deleting users because it affects the properties for various records. For example, this user Bonnie may have added actions or notes that she was the author of, and in the properties for those notes you would see that. You would see her name in the properties of a record if she added it to the system or if she added gifts to the system. So I think you want to retain that information and not delete users altogether and affect those properties. So my recommendation is just to put a prefix in front of the name so that you know it's no longer valid or active. And I just use XX. You could use whatever you like. At the same time, be sure that you take the user out of any groups. So they are not supervisor rights. They have group rights, but they're not in any group, which in effect gives them 0 rights. They could log into Razor's Edge, but they wouldn't see anything. It would be an empty shell. So those changes that we talked about previously are those first stage, clean out the cobwebs kinds of changes, kinds of tasks. And this is too, but those previous tasks that we discussed had to do with sort of the configuration, the backbone of the database, and now we're getting more into the constituent records themselves. But over the course of the year, you might have had some records that moved, the individuals moved, or you lost their address for whatever reason, or they don't any longer have a valid address and they're not marked as such. So you would need to create a query to isolate those records. And my example is to take the preferred address and check for any records that have no preferred address lines. So there's no street name, there's no anything rather, in the box for address lines on Bio 1. At the same time, these records are not already checked as having no valid address, and I know that by this checkbox at the top of the screen. So this is my query for isolating the records in the first place, the constituents who have no bad address, and then I want to take that group and mark them all as having no valid address. So I go to Admin, Global Change, and select Constituent as the kind of global change that I'm going to execute. And the first and most important thing about a global change is using or selecting the group to change instead of selecting the entire database for this change. So I will include selected constituents and select the query that I just created that has only my only the bad address records. And then I will select what kind of change I want to make to the group that I've selected to change. So I will take that the constituent has no valid address and select that and choose, that's a checkbox on Bio 1, right? So I'll choose that for all the ones that are unchecked, I'll replace with a check. So from the blank address lines query, I'm going to execute the change to turn on the box for no valid addresses. It's also very important to check that you want to create a query of exceptions and a query of actual changes. This is important because global change is another one of those no undo kinds of tasks. Once you've done it, it's done. There is no going back. There's no way to easily change it back to the way it was before. But if at least you have all the records that were changed in a query, then you can go back through them one by one. Which leads me to my little caution that global changes are one of the things that can create a sense of danger, or at least a healthy dose of caution. So maybe not ninjas and pirates level, but definitely a level of mindfulness, a level of consideration and thoughtfulness, and being methodical to make sure that you're changing the things that you want to change and nothing more. And also another plug to have done your backup before you even start. But global changes are something good to do when you're fresh, maybe early in the morning, or at least when you're not having interruptions and you can complete the process start to finish. And again, have a backup. Closing open actions is another great use of global change. Actions, as you know, are those ways that you track your communications with donors or prospects or constituents, meetings, phone calls, emails, tasks, follow-ups, and you can use actions to create a to-do list or a punch list for yourself and remind yourself of things that are upcoming. However, that becomes difficult if the actions that you have already completed aren't marked as such. Then it looks like your to-do list is much bigger than it actually should be. So closing old actions that have been completed is one of the tasks in our spring cleaning. So first you need, again, to isolate the records just like you did with the no valid address one. So I create a query. In this case, I don't know if you can see the text is small, but the query criteria that I've created is that the action date is less than the start of this calendar year. So any actions where the date was prior to January 1, 2016, and at the same time the action has not been completed. The checkbox next to completed is unchecked. And by the way, this is an action type of query from the start instead of what you might be more used to using, which is a constituent query. So once I have the group with my action query, then I take that query back to admin, global change. This time I'm using an action type of global change. When I did no valid address, that was a constituent type of global change. And the change that I'm making is to replace the unchecked action completed checkbox with a check. So included the query of old open actions prior to January 1, and then made the change of replace unchecked with checked. Always creating my query of exceptions and of changed records. And then that way your to-do list will be accurate. So those were the annually occurring sweep out the cobwebs kinds of spring cleaning tasks. Other things that you might use admin and config for are to globally write off annual pledges. So these are not multi-year pledges, but pledges that should have been completed within the course of the year. So for whatever reason they weren't, you go back, you write them off, and those individuals will no longer get reminders, and you'll no longer see that amount in your total income or income committed for the year. You might also globally change constituent codes for those that are time sensitive or have a term, like parents of current students at your school, or board members whose term is ending, or volunteers who are involved on an annual basis. So you can make a global change to change those constituent codes to past or to put an end date on them. Maybe you have a new initiative to target constituents by geography, so you need to assign a region or a county based on their address. So you could query on the address and create the groups, and then globally assign the region code. Lots of organizations shuffle the solicitor assignments from year to year, and so reassigning solicitors globally and changing the gift officers' portfolios might be helpful. Also, member-type organizations like museums might find it helpful to drop lapsed members on an annual basis. These are members who have been lapsed for a period of time that you deem long enough to know that you're probably not getting them back, so they become dropped. And this helps you better manage your statistics and to know who is an active member and who's not. So these are all good annually occurring spring cleaning kinds of tasks. And some of these are great to have performed at the end of your fiscal year. And so we might address that in more detail in an upcoming webinar as we get closer to June 30, which is a common end of fiscal year for a lot of organizations. Now these are tasks that might rise to that next level of painting the dining room. So these are things that require a little bit more organization, maybe a little bit more of a step back from your usual duties and some time to allow to devote to them. And a lot of them make use of the import feature that is in the admin area of Raiser's Edge. This allows you to bring a lot of data in at one time. So maybe you do a change of address. You found through your cobweb sweeping that you have a lot of no valid address records, and you want to rectify that by sending your whole database out to get addresses updated, and then import the corrected addresses back in. By the same token, you can do some research, some wealth screening, and then import back in ratings based on the financial data or the philanthropic data that you get back on your constituents. The primary addressee and salutation is very important to records when you're doing mailing lists, and very important to donors in that they want to be addressed in a way that is reassuring to them that they know that you know who they are. And from time to time, the way that an organization uses addresses and salutations changes, or maybe the users have changed over the years and they had a different understanding of how addresses and salutations worked. So it's just a good opportunity to touch each one of these and make sure that every donor is being addressed, is being called by the name that they want to be called. And this is more of an in-depth process. So it requires maybe an export, an evaluation of the data, and then a re-import. And the same with constituent codes. If you have multiple constituent codes per person, if that's something that's allowed in your database, and an individual could be a board member and an alum and a current parent, which is most important to you for counting that record, so to speak, in reports or in statistical evaluations. So maybe sometimes that hierarchy changes based on leadership or based on the kinds of fundraising initiatives that you're doing or the kinds of reporting that you have to do to accrediting bodies. So is the hierarchy set up the best way for you? And then do the records all align with that hierarchy so that the most important constituent code is at the top? If you do special events, maybe as the run-up to the event itself happens, you lose track of the data, and which is common, right? And the information is in the system, but the attendance records is not. So you have a spreadsheet of your event participants, and you marked on the day of the event whether they showed or didn't show, and then that needs to get back into Raiser's Edge. Or maybe you have, speaking of special events, an auction and an auction software that tracks purchases, and you want to get that information back into Raiser's Edge. So you use a third-party system that needs to be integrated into Raiser's Edge. So these are all a little bit higher level, or a little bit more time-consuming at least, and resource needy projects that you might do every few years. Might be every year, it might be every 2 or 3 years. But these are all things that are possible using the admin area of Raiser's Edge. And there are also things that Capital Business Solutions can certainly help with if, in finding that they are a little bit more resource heavy, your staff internally doesn't have the bandwidth for it. And then finally, we have those replace the roof kinds of projects, replace the HVAC kinds of projects, where maybe over the years there have been inconsistencies that are sort of piling up and now are at a critical mass. Or maybe there has been a change in leadership or a definite shift in priorities, and the way that the database was set up years and years ago isn't aligning with your current way of doing business. So maybe it's a good time to do a total overhaul, or maybe there are lots of data integrity issues with constituent records, like there are a lot that we know are inactive that we never use, and it would streamline our database greatly in order to make those inactive or somehow sequester them. Changing the campaign fund and appeal hierarchy is something that is pretty significant in terms of changes, but also very needed at times. Like I say, if priorities shift, or if ways of doing business shift, or if there's an occurrence like getting a new financial software that doesn't that causes a shift in the way that you want to look at funds. We talked about changing the constituent code hierarchy, and did just mention changing financial systems. So the Financial Edge is one of the Blackbaud systems, also Education Edge for schools, and maybe this is the time, you've been talking about it for years, but maybe this is the time that you want to get those 2 systems or 3 systems talking to each other. So integrating is no joke. It's a great tool for providing increased efficiency so that different departments aren't doing the same work, so that the databases talk to each other and that repetition, that redundancy doesn't have to happen. But it is an undertaking that you want to do methodically and with a lot of planning. So yeah, a more than or a less often than annual occurrence, maybe once every even 5 to 8 years, these larger projects. And again, these are things that can be executed, can be performed using the tools that we've talked about. It would be using the global change and the import kinds of tools, but just on a much larger scale. Deactivating campaigns and funds, for example, and creating new ones, and then a global change for all the gifts that have those campaigns and funds. So no small undertaking, but certainly achievable using the tools provided in Razor's Edge, and also another resource or another help, assistance service that Capital Business Solutions can help you with. So that's it for our spring cleaning your Razor's Edge database eFocus webinar. I hope that you have enjoyed it and found some tools and tricks and tips that will help you scrub your database and clean your house and go forward with optimal performance. Thank you so much for your time.